Part 1, the Economic Reality Check. Welcome, friends, to another discussion of the economic events that are shaping our lives, limiting our futures, and exposing the deep structural contradictions of the capitalist system we are forced to live under. Today, we have to talk about something that is being presented in the mainstream media as a political spat, a disagreement between a president and some economists. But I want you to understand that what is happening right now with the Trump tariffs, and specifically the reaction to the New York Federal Reserve's study on those tariffs, is not just a political argument. It is a revelation. It is a moment where the curtain is pulled back and the ugly, exploitative machinery of the system is laid bare for everyone to see. We need to be very clear about what has happened. The New York Federal Reserve, let's be precise here, this is not a socialist organization. This is not a group of radical Marxists meeting in a basement to overthrow the government. This is a pillar of the establishment. This is one of the key institutions designed to manage and stabilize global capitalism. Even they, with all their biases toward the system, could not hide the numbers. They published a study, a rigorous analysis of what has happened to the United States economy under the tariff regime of 2025. And what did they find? They found what every serious student of economics, every critic of capitalism, and frankly, what the administration itself knows deep down but cannot admit. They found that United States firms and United States consumers, that means you, that means me, that means the working class of this country, bore approximately 90% of the economic burden of these tariffs. Let that sink in, 90%. When the government tells you that they are making foreign countries pay, that they are extracting wealth from China or Europe or Mexico to benefit the American people, they are engaging in a fantasy. The reality, the hard, cold economic reality documented by the Federal Reserve is that the cost is being passed directly down the line to the people who can least afford it. The study shows that import duties as a share of the total value of imports rose from a mere 2.6% to 13% in 2025. That is a massive spike. And who paid for it? It wasn't the Chinese exporters. It wasn't the European manufacturers. It was the American household. The study estimates that this policy resulted in a tax increase, because that is what a tariff is. Make no mistake, it is a tax of more than $1,000 per household in 2025 alone. And if the current trajectory continues, if the policies that are already announced are fully implemented, that number is projected to rise to $1,300 per household in 2026. Now pause for a moment and think about what $1,000 means to the average working class family in this country. We are living in a time where the majority of Americans do not have $400 in the bank for an emergency. We are living in a time of skyrocketing rents, of food inflation that eats away at every paycheck, of medical costs that bankrupt families daily. In that context, the government comes along and effectively extracts another $1,000 from your pocket. But they don't do it by sending you a bill that says tax. Oh no, that would be too honest. That would provoke a revolution. They do it by raising the price of the shoes you buy, the electronics you need for your work, the parts that go into your car, the food on your table. It is a hidden tax, a regressive tax, a tax that falls hardest on those who spend the largest portion of their income on consumption, which is the working class. The New York Fed noted that this is the largest tax increase as a percentage of GDP since 1993. Think about that history. For 30 years, we have been told that the goal of economic policy is to lower taxes, to put money back in people's pockets. And here we have a populist administration, one that claims to speak for the forgotten man, enacting the single largest tax hike on the American people in 3 decades. It is a contradiction so glaring it is painful to look at. But here is where the story gets truly interesting and where we see the mechanisms of ideology at work. How did the White House respond to this study? Did they say, let us review the data? Did they say, perhaps we need to adjust our strategy to protect the consumer? No, they attacked the messenger. Kevin Hassett, the top economic advisor to the president, went on television and dismissed the entire study. He didn't offer a counter study. He didn't provide better data. He simply labeled the New York Federal Reserve, again, a central institution of American capitalism, as politically motivated. He called the analysis flashy and claimed it was designed to garner headlines. This is the defense mechanism of a system that cannot justify its own existence. When the facts contradict the narrative does not change. The facts are declared to be enemies. Hassett claimed that there are fatal flaws in the study, but notice he was very light on the details of what those flaws actually were. He relied on the old, tired argument that perhaps foreign exporters lowered their prices to absorb the tariffs. But the data doesn't show that. The data shows that the prices at the dock, the prices paid by American importers, stayed roughly the same or went up. The tax was added on top, and the importer, looking to protect their profit margin, because that is what capitalists do, they must protect the profit or they cease to be capitalists, passed that cost on to the retailer, who passed it on to you. Hassett's dismissal is part of a pattern we are seeing more and more. It is an attack on independent analysis. Whether it is the Bureau of Labor Statistics or the Federal Reserve or university research centers, if the data suggests that the policies of the ruling class are hurting the people, the data is attacked. We saw this with the revision of the job numbers. We have been told for years now about a manufacturing renaissance. We were promised that these tariffs would bring the steel mills back, that the factories would open their doors, and the good, high-paying union jobs of the 1950s would return. That was the promise. That was the seduction. But what is the reality? The government recently had to revise the employment numbers down by nearly 1 million jobs. 1 million jobs that they claimed existed, that they boasted about in speeches, that they used to justify these very tariffs, simply vanished into thin air upon closer inspection. The manufacturing sector is not booming, it is struggling. Why? Because American manufacturers also rely on imported parts. When you put a tariff on steel to protect the steel mill, you raise the cost for the car manufacturer, the appliance maker, the construction company. They then have to raise their prices or cut their workforce. This is the interconnected nature of the global capitalist economy. You cannot simply build a wall around one section of it and expect the rest to function as normal. The administration's behavior here is indicative of a ruling class that has run out of ideas. They know that neoliberal globalization, the free trade deals of the 90s and 2000s, devastated the American working class. They know that, and they rode the anger against that devastation into power. But their solution is not to change the class structure. It is not to give workers control over production. It is not to distribute the surplus wealth more equitably. No, their solution is to engage in a trade war that protects certain sectors of domestic capital while forcing the working class to foot the bill. It is a scam. It is a redistribution of wealth, all right? A redistribution from the many to the few, disguised as patriotic economic nationalism. When Hesset says the study is politically motivated, he is projecting. The tariffs themselves are politically motivated. They are designed to secure votes in key industrial states by offering the illusion of protection while the actual economic cost is spread out across the entire population in the form of higher prices. It is a cynical calculation. They are betting that you will see the headline, "President Fights for Steel Jobs," and cheer, while you won't connect the fact that your grocery bill is up 20% to that same policy. This $1,000 tax increase is a crushing burden. For a family on the edge, that is the difference between fixing the car or walking to work. It is the difference between getting a prescription filled or splitting pills. And the arrogance of an economic advisor sitting in a comfortable office in the White House dismissing this reality as fake news or political bias is a slap in the face to every worker in this country. It demonstrates the complete disconnect between the people who make the decisions and the people who suffer the consequences of those decisions. We have to understand that this is not an accident. This is not a mistake by the Trump administration. It is a feature of how capitalism tries to solve its crises. The system is in decline. The U.S. hegemony over the global economy is shrinking. Faced with the rise of China, faced with the internal decay of its own infrastructure, the U.S. empire is lashing out. Tariffs are a weapon in that struggle. But like all weapons in a class war, the collateral damage is human beings. The collateral damage is your standard of living. The New York Fed study is just the tip of the iceberg. Other studies have found the same thing. The Peterson Institute, the National Bureau of Economic Research, study after study confirms that domestic consumers pay the vast majority of tariffs. The range is somewhere between 88% and 100%. The idea that China pays is a lie. It is a lie told to make you feel like you are winning while you are losing. And let's look at the argument that investment is booming. Hassett claims that we are seeing an investment boom that the models aren't capturing. But where is this investment going? Is it going into wages? No. Real wages have been stagnant or falling when adjusted for this inflation. Is it going into better working conditions? No. It is going into automation, into stock buybacks, into speculative assets. The boom is for the owners of capital. The bust is for the people who sell their labor for a wage. The dismissal of the $1,000 cost is also an admission that they do not care about the distribution of pain. In their economic models, if the GDP goes up, the economy is good. It doesn't matter if the GDP growth is captured entirely by the top 1%, while the bottom 50% slide further into debt. That detail is irrelevant to them. But to us, to the Marxian analyst, that detail is the whole story. The economy is not a single number. The economy is a set of relationships between people. And the relationship defined by these tariffs is one of increased exploitation. You are working harder, paying more, and getting less. That is the definition of a declining standard of living. We must also consider the political danger of censoring or delegitimizing economic data. If the government can simply declare that any negative report is fake, then we lose the ability to have any objective reality to discuss. We enter a world where the economy is whatever the dear leader says it is. If he says it is the greatest economy in history, then it is, even if you are hungry. This is a dangerous slide toward authoritarianism, and it is fueled by economic desperation. The irony, of course, is palpable. The very people who railed against the elites and the establishment are now using the power of the state to impose a tax on the working class that the elites in the Hamptons will barely notice. A $1,000 increase in costs for a billionaire is a rounding error. For a janitor, it is a catastrophe. Tariffs are, by their nature, flat taxes on consumption. They do not discriminate based on ability to pay. Therefore, they inherently punish the poor more than the rich. So when you see these headlines, when you hear the administration brushing off the New York Fed, do not be fooled. Do not think this is just technical jargon. This is a robbery in progress. They are taking money out of your pocket to fight a trade war that will ultimately benefit only a small slice of domestic capital, if it benefits anyone at all. The 90% burden is not just a statistic. It is a measure of the class struggle. It is a measure of how much weight is being placed on your shoulders to keep this crumbling system upright. This is the reality of the situation. The numbers are in, the verdict is clear, and the administration's only response is denial. But denial does not pay the rent. Denial does not buy the groceries. And eventually, the economic reality will crash through the political wall they are trying to build. We are seeing the cracks already, the downward revision of jobs, the persistent inflation, the rising consumer debt. These are the tremors before the earthquake. And when that earthquake comes, we need to be ready to explain why it happened, not because of bad luck, but because of the systemic failures of a capitalism that values profit over people and power over truth. We must look deeper at this reaction from the White House because it tells us something profound about the fragility of the current economic order. When Kevin Hassett, a man who represents the highest levels of economic advising in the United States government, comes out and calls a research paper from the New York Federal Reserve the worst paper he has ever seen, we are witnessing a moment of desperation. He didn't just disagree with the methodology. He didn't just say we have different data. No, he went much further. He demanded that the authors be disciplined. Think about what that means in a society that prides itself on free speech and academic freedom. The state is effectively threatening economists for publishing data that contradicts the official political narrative. This is not the behavior of a confident administration. This is not the behavior of a system that is working. This is the behavior of a system that is afraid. They are afraid because the reality of the economic situation is becoming impossible to hide. They know that if the working class understands that they are paying $1,000 or $1,300 more per year just to subsidize a trade war that benefits a handful of domestic corporations, the political consequences could be devastating. So they have to shut down the conversation. They have to discredit the messenger. They have to turn economics into a loyalty test rather than a science. Hassett claims that the study ignored the benefits of the tariffs. He talks about higher wages and lower prices. But where are these lower prices? Ask any family shopping for groceries this week. Ask anyone trying to buy a car or replace a home appliance. The prices are not lower, they are higher, and they are higher precisely because of the mechanisms we have been discussing. When you tax imports in a globalized economy, you are taxing the supply chain. You are taxing the very inputs that domestic businesses need to function. And those businesses operating under the iron law of profit maximization pass those costs on to you. To claim otherwise is to deny the basic functioning of the market system they claim to love so much. And what about wages? We hear this refrain constantly. Wages are up. But we have to ask the Marxist question, real wages or nominal wages? If your paycheck goes up by 3%, but inflation, driven in part by these very tariffs, goes up by 4 or 5%, you have effectively taken a pay cut. You are poorer today than you were yesterday, even if the number on your check is slightly higher. The administration relies on this money illusion to keep you docile. They want you to look at the nominal increase and feel gratitude, while the landlord and the grocery store take it all back and then some. This is the classic shell game of capitalist economics. They show you the shiny object over here. Look, we are fighting China. Look, we are protecting steel. While over there, your standard of living is being quietly eroded. The New York Fed study simply shined a light on the shell game. It showed the cost. It showed who is paying. And for that act of transparency, for that moment of honesty, the authors are being attacked as if they are traitors. It is important to remember that the Federal Reserve is not a radical institution. It is the central bank of the United States. Its job is to manage the currency and stabilize the financial system for the benefit of capital. If even they are sounding the alarm, if even they are saying this policy is hurting the economy, then you know the situation is serious. It suggests a split within the ruling class itself. One faction, the globalists, the financiers, sees these tariffs as dangerous and destabilizing. The other faction, the economic nationalists, the protectionists, sees them as a necessary tool to maintain political power. And caught in the middle of this fight between two wings of the capitalist class is you, the worker. You are the collateral damage. You are the one paying the bill. The dismissal of this study is a warning. It is a warning that we are entering a phase where facts will be subordinate to political necessity. If the data says the economy is bad, the data is wrong. If the prices are high, you are imagining it. If you are struggling, it is your fault, not the system's. This is gaslighting on a macroeconomic scale, and it is the only strategy they have left. They cannot fix the underlying contradictions of the system. They cannot bring back the booming growth of the post-war era. So they have to manage your perception of the decline. But we know better. We know that an economy is judged not by the speeches of politicians, but by the material conditions of the people. And by that standard, this policy is a failure. It is a tax on the working class, plain and simple. It is a transfer of wealth from your pocket to the coffers of the state and the balance sheets of protected industries. And no amount of bluster, no amount of attacks on researchers can change that fundamental economic fact. We must see through the theater. We must look at the reality. And the reality is that capitalism, in its current crisis, has nothing left to offer you but higher prices and empty promises. That is the lesson of the New York Fed study. And that is why they are so desperate to make you forget it. Do not forget it. Understand it. And let it be another reason why we need to move beyond this system entirely to one that is organized for human needs, not for profit and political power. Thank you for joining me.